All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're mapping out Dr. Robert Peterson's genuinely fascinating academic lecture on the biblical doctrine of spiritual beings. If you've ever wondered how the actual source texts describe the unseen world, far away from all the folklore, the Renaissance paintings, and the fiction, well, you are in the exact right place. We're going to unpack exactly what the text says, and honestly, just as importantly, what it doesn't say about angels, Satan, and demons. Let's just go ahead and address the elephant in the room right off the bat. Do the pop culture depictions we see everywhere actually match the source text? Think about it for a second. When you picture an angel, do you see a chubby little baby with tiny wings playing a harp, or maybe a glowing woman with a halo? And when you picture the devil, is he a guy in a red suit holding a pitchfork? Well, as we're about to see, the academic study of these beings paints a radically different and, frankly, far more intense picture. To keep things organized and make sense of this dense material, we're going to break Dr. Peterson's lecture down into 5 clear theological categories. We're starting with the light and moving into the dark. So, we'll cover the nature of angels, the roles of good angels, the fall and Satan, the tactics of the fallen, and wrap up with the ultimate triumph.
So, Category 1, the nature of angels. Specifically, that they are creatures, not the Creator. Let's look at what these invisible entities actually are at their absolute core.
Dr. Peterson makes a really interesting point here. He emphasizes that the Bible doesn't actually give us a complete angelology. It's not some neatly categorized encyclopedia of the spiritual realm. Instead, it provides fragments of data, little glimpses behind the curtain, that we have to carefully piece together. And interestingly enough, the text almost entirely speaks of angels only in relation to God and His purposes, rather than treating them as standalone subjects.
The absolutely crucial takeaway is that angels are merely created beings. They have hard limitations. The contrast is literally day and night. While God is the limitless creator who is to be worshipped, angels are simply creatures. They are absolutely not divine. They have limited knowledge. They have limited power. In fact, Dr. Peterson points out this great moment in the book of Revelation, where the Apostle John actually falls down to worship a revealing angel, and the angel strictly rebukes him. They are the worshipers, never the worshipped.
So if we completely dispel those popular myths, what are we left with? Well, Peterson points out that these are highly organized, incredibly powerful spiritual beings. And when they do appear, it's as mighty warriors, no women or babies. They are highly intelligent, sure, but they don't know everything. For instance, they don't know the time of Christ's return. They were created in just massive, totally innumerable numbers, often called myriads. They have a strict hierarchy led by archangels like Michael and Gabriel. But fundamentally, they are spirits. No physical bodies, no marriage, no procreating, and they do not die.
Moving right along to Category 2, the roles of good angels or the messengers. Now that we know what they are, let's examine their specific duties. What exactly do they do all day?
Dr. Peterson explicitly outlines 4 primary functions for good angels, and it shows they are actively working within the human realm to execute divine will. First, they continuously adore and praise God. Second, they act as literal messengers. Fun fact, the word angel actually translates directly to messenger. Third, and this is a bit more fearsome, they act as agents of God's judgment on rebellious humans, which we see in a lot of historical accounts in the text. And fourth, they serve and preserve God's people.
There is a fantastic quote from Hebrews that brilliantly illustrates this deep investment in humanity. It asks, "Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve those who will inherit salvation?" I love that because it frames them not as distant, detached entities floating in the clouds, but as ministering spirits actively dispatched to help and protect. It's a very hands-on job description.
And you really see this hands-on approach when you look at the timeline of Christ's life. Good angels are deeply woven into literally every major chronological milestone. Gabriel predicts his birth to Mary, angels step in to physically minister to Jesus in the wilderness, and again during his darkest moments in Gethsemane. They're the ones sitting in the empty tomb announcing the resurrection. They are right there at the ascension, and the text claims they'll be the massive heavenly army accompanying his future return. Which brings us to Category 3, the fall and Satan, or the origin of the dark, because the source text describes a much darker reality too, bringing us to the origins of demonic forces. Here is a really foundational point. God did not create evil beings, period. God created all angels as holy and good, but prior to the creation of human beings, there was this massive, frankly mysterious, rebellion in the heavenly realm. Dr. Peterson notes that we can't fully comprehend exactly why these highly intelligent beings chose to rebel, but the text is crystal clear that they did. And that right there is the origin point of all demonic forces. And this opens up the whole study of demonology. Now, some scholars symbolically link this ancient angelic rebellion to Old Testament passages in Isaiah and Ezekiel about the arrogant kings of Babylon and Tyre. But Dr. Peterson carefully notes that this interpretation is pretty controversial. He prefers to stick strictly to what is absolutely certain. These fallen entities are the unclean spirits mentioned all throughout the New Testament, actively working against divine purposes. The leader of this whole rebellion is given some very specific names in Revelation 12:9, and they perfectly describe his nature. He's called Satan, which literally means the adversary or the accuser. He's described as a great dragon and the ancient serpent, tying him all the way back to the dawn of humanity. These aren't just spooky nicknames. They are highly descriptive of his character as a murderer, a liar, and his massive historical resume as the ultimate deceiver.
Let's shift to Category 4, Tactics of the Fallen, and their methods of deception. Dr. Peterson details exactly how these fallen spiritual forces operate against humanity today.
This is where it gets really practical. Because the devil's tactics, they aren't mostly spooky movie-style possessions. They are actually deeply mundane. We're talking everyday temptations aimed at slowly destroying human character. Materialism, pride, immorality, sinful anger, holding on to grudges and unforgiveness. We often imagine demonic activity as floating furniture and spinning heads, but the text warns that their primary battleground is incredibly ordinary. It's the subtle pushing of humanity toward division, greed, and destructive habits. Zooming out a bit, their broader strategies involve blinding unbelievers to the truth, and, terrifyingly, they disguise themselves as angels of light. That means they wrap up terrible, destructive ideas to look like something good or morally superior. They actively promote false doctrines and idolatry. And while Dr. Peterson notes that believers cannot be possessed entirely, they can absolutely be severely afflicted. The entire strategy here is the total sabotage of human flourishing and truth. Finally, we arrive at Category 5, the ultimate triumph. We're looking at their limits and the final resolution to this cosmic conflict. Because if we stopped right there, it might feel like a dualistic universe, right? Good and evil, equally matched, duking it out. But that is absolutely not the case. We have to return to our core premise here. Satan and his demons are not equal rivals to God. Not even close. They are merely creatures whose power is heavily restricted by providence. The devil is entirely subject to the sovereign rule of God. He is on a leash. And because of their rebellion, their fate is definitively locked in. They are fighting a war they have inherently already lost. Because their power is so strictly limited by the Creator, the biblical text gives a very firm assurance to people. James 4:7 says, "Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." That's not a polite suggestion. It's basically a statement of spiritual mechanics. These beings might be powerful, for sure, but they are absolutely vulnerable to human resistance when that resistance is grounded in divine truth.
So, stripping away all the Hollywood embellishments, the pitchforks, the little harps, I want to leave you with this thought to ponder. If angels and demons aren't gods, and they aren't cartoon characters, but are instead highly intelligent, limited creatures operating entirely within a sovereign framework, how does that change your view of the unseen world around us? It certainly makes the mundane, everyday struggles of life feel a whole lot more profound, doesn't it? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep seeking clarity in everything you study.